Hollywood celebrities have been using secret connections to get fake vaccine cards as early as April 2021. This is according to Hollywood insider Roger Simon. He shared with me stories from an inside source. Joining me is Roger Simon. He's an award-winning novelist, Oscar-nominated screenwriter, co-founder of PJ Media. Now, Mr. Simon, I was reading your Epoch Times article today of this story. I was very fascinated. I wonder if you could tell our viewers this story. Maybe we'll go from, you got a call from someone working
Well,
in
what
the...
happened was a friend of mine, I live now, I'm a kind of an expat from Hollywood, and I live in Nashville. And I got a call from a friend who's also an expat from Los Angeles, though not from Hollywood, who said, I have a story for you. You know, most of the time you get a good story, it's not because you're a great detective, it's because somebody phones you and tells you. And this is what it was. He said, you know, I know a man who has been selling phony, not phony, but actually real vaccine cards to Hollywood stars and others. And I said, "Oh, so should I have this guy call you?" So he did, and I talked to this person. And when I talked to him very carefully, trying not to identify him because I don't think he'd do well with the IRS or the Department of Justice. So, but I found out that there was one of the things that is the hallmark of Hollywood these days, unfortunately, is hypocrisy. And it goes over into the vaccines as well, because they lead, Hollywood and California, of course, lead in telling us the vaccines are good for us. But in secret, a number of these Hollywood stars had been reading the Epoch Times, among other places, and many of the others, where the vaccines were being exposed as not being all they were cracked up to be. In fact, quite dangerous in some instances, particularly for young women, because it interferes with their possibilities of reproduction. And so 90% of the people who went to this person for help to get these cards turned out to be women. Also, this person got the cards from the hospital pharmacy where the COVID vaccines, where the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were dispensed. So they were authentic cards which had the batch numbers of the vaccines but had no name on them. So he sold them for a fee that I won't disclose, but it was not crazy at all. And they use them. Now, these are very often the same people that you might see on Twitter or Instagram inveighing against those who were not wearing masks or refused to take the vaccine. So that's really hypocritical. Not all of them, but there were quite a number were. I also asked him whether when they came to him and got the card, whether they learned anything from the experience. And he said a very few did. Most didn't. You know, my experience of Hollywood is that it's so competitive and people are so fearful for their jobs. Even more so now that Hollywood isn't quite what it was 25 or 30 years ago, that, you know, they'll do anything to look like they're okay. At the same time, they're reading all these things that we all do, and they're seeing people drop dead, or, you know, famous athletes falling down on a basketball court and all these, I mean, they see those things. So they're worried too for themselves, but they can't break through and be honest about it. It's a sad situation, really.
So what I'd like to know is that the source that called you mentioned a couple of specific stories. I wonder if you'd like to mention some of those?
Oh, well, one of the great stories, and he knew that I knew, and I knew that he knew the person that he was referring to. But we never mentioned the name in deference to him or her. But it was a famous entertainer who liked to go to the sports events in Los Angeles, and of course sit in the front, in the first row or wherever. And this person needed a card, he or she thought, to get into the stadium because the stadiums in LA, being California, I think this was true in New York too for a while, were demanding certification that you've been vaccinated in order to go in and watch the game. So she, or whatever, came to this guy and got get the card. But then she got panicked, and the reason she panicked was she had heard that there would be sentries standing at every door, including the VIP entrance where he or she, of course, entered, with iPads checking on the database, California database. Now, it turns out that the database was very badly done and flawed, and 30% of the names never even got on it. So he said to this person, well, just yell at them and say, hey, I'm in that base, and stop it, and you'll get through, which actually happened in some cases. But the woman, she still panicked on that and wouldn't go. And but it turned out there was no. And so what that person did was give the ticket, not the card because it wouldn't work, but gave the ticket to the manager. That they all have a manager, these Hollywood personalities, and the manager went and got the seat in the front row, and it turned out no one was at the door guarding it. So all of these things are. I mean, on one level they're hysterically funny, and the other level they're disgusting. It's however you want to look at it. It's complicated. So that was just one example. Actually, in other cases, it expanded well beyond Hollywood personalities to regular people, or quote normal people, including 3 nurses from a very big local hospital who turned out to be on the compliance committee for vaccinations. But they wanted these cards themselves too, and they knew very well that the database was flawed, so they weren't worried about that. In fact, they gave this person a lot of information about the database. This is sort of dribbled off now, but during all of 2021, this was, and a lot of 2022, this was going on heavily. And this guy gave away, he said, over 250 cards.
Wow.
And he said too that others were doing it. I mean, he wasn't the only game in town, as it were. And he claimed others were charging more.
Mr. Simon, what are these Hollywood personalities using these cards for? Is it purely to get into sports games, restaurants, that sorts?
Yeah, primarily things like that. We all know the places that they were demanding. It even takes you into a hospital or government building. In California during those periods, you needed to show that you were vaccinated. So it would work. It actually worked anywhere because it was a real card. He wasn't giving them fakes. He had just gotten a stack of real cards from the pharmacy. Somebody gave it to him, obviously.
I'm curious, what's your takeaway from this? What's your big picture? What's the moral?
The moral is that things are really immoral. That's the sad truth of it. But also, the government was doing a bad thing too. So it's like a rondelay of bad faith. And if the government starts by doing all of this stuff, as we're learning now, the whole mandatory vaccination thing was a very bad mistake. And if it starts with that, people are going to do things like this. That doesn't mean they're good people for it. It just means that is the natural thing that occurs. And this is just part of the great story of COVID-19, or the CCP virus, as they call it at Epic. I mean, this is just one other chapter.
Well, Mr. Simon, thank you so much for sharing this story. I think we're all glad this person called you.
I think look, the more we know about what really happened during COVID, the more we can hope it'll never happen again.
Thank you. Pleasure having you on today.
It was great to be here.